Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles and from the Big Apple in New York City, but not today because my co-host Adrian Gruberg from New York can't make it again. Boy, I tell you, when you get older, you just have too many doctor appointments and they take up your time. Can't do your radio show. But welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver at caregiverdave.com. Also coming to you live on demand 24/7 on numerous syndicated radio podcast networks and 26 global audio and video platforms, including iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio. I won't go on because it's a long list. In fact, we are proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, and #2 caregiver podcast on FeedSpot out of the top 60, and #2 on caringvillage.com. And we have an especially exciting show planned for you today. Author of I've Got Some Good News and Some Bad News, Your Old Tales of a Geriatrician, What to Expect in Your 60s, 70s, 80s, and Beyond, senior, Dr. David Bernstein. And I always love a guy named David because I never met a man named David I didn't like. And he's a highly respected award-winning physician, board certified in internal medicine and geriatric. Dr. Bernstein is a graduate of Albany Medical College, not too far. Well, yeah, it is too far from Times Square. You're way up north. And is an associate clinical professor at the University of South Florida College of Medicine. But before we get started, I do want to thank my last week's guest, author of How to Live Longer Without Growing Older. Learn how to put your longevity back in your control. Karen Owak's message, your age is a given, growing old is a choice. Kind of similar to your message, Doctor. And just a reminder, you can watch or listen to that interview and all our interviews on our membership website, caregiverdave.com, or any of our other 26 global networks I mentioned earlier. Okay, enough of that. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Dave, it's a pleasure to be here.
You are in Florida. I think that's what you said.
Correct. Tampa Bay area.
Tampa Bay. Okay. I always like to ask my guests, just who is Dr. David Bernstein and why was he placed on this earth? Why don't you start with that one?
Well, I live in the Tampa Bay area, but I grew up not far from where your picture is in Times Square. I grew up on Long Island. And I was raised by my parents, and my dad was a combat wounded World War II veteran and an immigrant to this country from Poland.
Wow.
And lost his father when he was 16. And he taught me about determination, survival, success. And those were incredible traits for him to teach me.
Yeah.
My mother taught me that loving your parents, and in my case, my grandparents, was important. And she became very frustrated with the care her parents got when they aged. She told me if I was going to become a doctor, and she said, you should become a doctor. It was kind of one of those things in the family. Don't go into the business, become a doctor. That I need to be very nice and good to my older patients because she's experienced that. When I was in high school, somehow a National Geographic magazine found its way into my hands. And on the cover of 1973 December was a centenarian. I read that and devoured that article, and I've remembered it. I found through the way you can do things on the internet, I found the cover picture, read it again, and I was intrigued by how people can live to be 100. And I set my goals as if I'm going to be a doctor and my mom wants me to be nice to old people, I'm going to learn about old people and centenarians. And it's been my purpose throughout my life. And at my high school graduation, the commencement speaker was a graduate from 10 years earlier, and he became a writer. So I added one more thing that I wanted to accomplish in life, and that's write. So I went to college in the Midwest, which was really great. And I went to medical school in Albany, New York. And I migrated to Florida, where my parents had eventually settled after leaving New York. And I practiced internal medicine and geriatric for 40 years. And lo and behold, I found myself in a senior citizen area. Some people call maybe St. Petersburg God's waiting room. But I took care of loads of older adults and learned what made them tick. And there was an extra little beneficial dividend from all of that being on the West Coast, is that I got a lot of people from the Midwest, and they were a whole bunch easier than taking care of people from the Northeast. So I thrive down in this area.
Wow. Yeah, you are surrounded by your patients. Tell me about yourself and what a geriatrician does for those of you out there who don't know.
Well, my training was, I went to medical school and then did an internship and residency, and I specialized in geriatrics, which is the care of older adults. And what I learned in observing my mother and my grandparents and lots of other people who were aging is it requires a special attention. It's like a juggler, but instead of juggling one or two balls, it's like juggling 8 or 10 at a time, because as people age, they acquire more and more chronic diseases. And I really like that challenge. If I were a dermatologist and I only had to take care of one thing at a time, I think I would be rather bored. But I really like the challenge of that. And I did have an interest in aging. So whatever gerontology courses I took in college prepared me for the social stuff that goes along with getting older. So it wasn't just the diseases, it was how people had their lives outside of their illness, how they interacted with their family and their friends. And I had an opportunity. I was a front row to individuals who aged well, and I could ask them any question I wanted and incorporate it into my visit. And those were things that were helpful for me. But what I also found is that it showed that I was really interested in them. So they really loved me when I would ask them questions about their kids or their grandkids, or what made them tick. And I was able to incorporate a whole bunch of that into what I've discovered is some of the tricks of the trade of aging well.
Yeah. Oh, when you talk about, living into your 60s, 70s, and 80s, I didn't know how old you would be, but you're obviously not in your 80s, right?
I'm not in my 80s.
Oh, good.
In my mid-60s.
So how did you learn about the 70s and the 80s? Just from your patients?
Well, I kept up on literature, and I read that article in 1973, which said everything I needed to know. But I did have this great opportunity. Well, I would speak in the community, and I would ask the guests in the audience, what is your secret to success? Because these people were in their 80s, and they drove there, and they were social and all that. And I would listen, and I condense it down to 5 items. There were 5 things that these people consistently said, and they're the following. I'm going to say it really fast.
And I assume that's what one of your book titles is, the 5 things.
5 things. Well, I have 2 books, and they each have 5 things. So in my first book, I've got some good news and some bad news. You're old. 5 things were the acronym GRACE. And the reason is I have 5 fingers in my hand, and most people can only remember 5 things at a time. Sure. So I really pretty much limit it that way. But there were 5 things. And these audiences and my patients told me the 5 things over and over again. They didn't spell it out to me like GRACE, GRACE, but I condensed it to that. So the people who had these great existence had a goal or a purpose in their life. They knew what they wanted to do. They served other people. They had passion for what they did, and it made them a better people. Yeah. The second thing is they all knew something about their DNA and their roots. And so roots, DNA, I got bad DNA, I'm going to do something about it. I have good DNA, I'm going to really protect it and do things to maintain my health. They had a positive attitude, but in addition to the positive attitude was gratitude and kindness. So, my ideal patients, and if they were listening to me now, they'd say, he's talking about me. They were retired Salvation Army officers. So they moved to this area. They had served people all their lives, and they continued to do that. They aged incredibly well. They were incredibly grateful for what I offered them. And they had the next letter in Grace C. They had companionship. They surrounded themselves with their friends, and they interacted well with one another, and they went to church together, and they had dinner after church, and they were a community, and they supported one another. Even though they tried to break HIPAA compliance, they would ask about how their patients were doing and how things were going. So they were really concerned about one another, and their companionship was really something spectacular. And then the final letter in Grace is E, and I use E for environment. How you interact with your environment, both your inside and your outside. So put yourself outside in a nice garden or in a forest and hike and be with nature. That has favorable things, but so does what you put in your body, how you eat, how you exercise. And I'll go into greater detail about that in terms of my Power of Five formula, but it's how you take care of yourself.
So people are living a long time, longer than they ever have before, right? And so that's why we're seeing, I assume, these dementia, Alzheimer's. I had to care for my mother who had dementia, my mother-in-law, now my mother's sister dealing with that. And, of course, I'm concerned that, is this heredity? So I went and got the early test, and I did that for like 3 years, every 6 months. And they says, well, I have some good news and bad news for you. They said, you didn't fail. That was the good news. But you're very close to that borderline.
Oh.
And about that time, I started doing, the TV shows and speeches, going on the road. And it started getting better. They said, oh, it's improving, but you're still very close to the line. And so there's no guarantee that if we do your Grace that everything's going to be fine, but does it increase the odds? I mean, I hate crossword puzzles, but I'm speaking a lot. I'm on television a lot. I try to memorize a lot of things. Very hard to memorize, but I do it anyway. What's your advice for guys who have a lot of people in the family who have dementia and they're trying to just let it miss them?
Well, I got to unravel that whole little thing there, but the first thing it does go back to roots. If you have, what I said about roots was, if you have bad roots, do something about it. If you have good roots, polish them and take good care of them. I'll say one little thing about that is, if you have really good roots, you should avoid going up on roofs and ladders and putting yourself in situations where you can have an accident and throw off those horrible roots. But if you have bad roots, do something about it. And so my Grace formula was all about what I observed and what science has shown.
Yeah.
But I went back to the drawing board to answer your question of what can a person do who has those risks? And that's where I came up with my book, The Power of Five, or my Power of Five formula. So there are going to be 5 things coming right at you in a second, Dave, about 5 things that you and your audience can do to, I'll use the word, insulate themselves or reduce their risk. I'm real careful about not using the word prevent or eliminate the possibility. But the more a person can do, the more they can insulate themselves from what might be inevitable. And science has proven this in different studies in all of these different realms. And you, as an example from what you just told me, is you do one of the things that's really good is you challenge your brain. It's not easy to have a podcast. It's not easy to be on script. It's not easy to be sitting in a Zoom presentation and interviewing someone and having to be prepared. So you challenge yourself, you travel, you talk to people, you're on television, you do these programs. It's an amazing thing. And it's one of the things I've challenged myself with also. It wasn't easy to be in practice and publish 4 books in the last 5 years or last 10 years of my practice. But I knew that was one of the ways of taking care of myself. It's also not necessarily easy to be out here doing podcasts and talking to people. And I do it because I really enjoy it. I really enjoy spreading the word of what I've learned, but also the challenge of doing it. So if I could, I'll finish the 5 things that people can do. I made this one even easier because they all begin with the letter S. Avoid sweets, avoid stress, get more sleep, sweat, and sex. So all 5 S's. Like and so, it's avoid sweets. Well, sugar is really bad for your brain, and it's bad for your waistline, and it's bad for lots of things. But one of those 5 things, what they have in common is they're all related in one way or another to the people who have cancer, heart disease, and neurodegenerative disease. So, and those are the most common things that we see in our society. Those were the things that I dealt with every day. And the one unifying thread through all that was inflammation. So that's the inflammation in our body. It's like getting a splinter in your finger. So if you get a splinter in your finger, your body's going to reject it. It's going to put out some of these neurohormonal chemicals to extinguish the flames from the splinter. The source is the obvious thing is remove the splinter. But inflammation causes vascular disease. It causes dementia. It's related to cancer. So we want to reduce inflammation. So the 5 things that I report for people to do are avoid sweets. So that means sugar, starches, carbohydrates. It also means eating a healthy diet, either a Mediterranean diet or a vegetarian or vegan diet tends to be the ones that are most helpful and protective of the brain. And sugar is really a bit of a toxic chemical to the brain. So
even natural sugar in fruit?
Well, if you eat sugar in fruit, it's surrounded by fiber. So the fiber basically insulates the sugar from all of those negative, horrible things that happen. But it's the sugars that are added to processed foods or added sugar to things that people think are healthy, like yogurt with added sugar. It contradicts and it contradicts the health benefits of that. Right. And cereals and that kids eat for breakfast are loaded with sugar, and they become addicted to them, and then that goes on through life. And it brings me back to one of the things you mentioned, that people are living longer. Well, for the last 2 years, we've seen life expectancy rates drop.
Yeah, and it was sad to hear that Ronald Reagan, the president, was succumbed to this, because I don't know anyone more positive than him, and I assume he was healthy. But getting back to sugar, we're putting on caregiver wellness retreats to get caregivers, out of their environment and take them to Acapulco, where there's a live-in chef. I just came back from 3 weeks in Acapulco, where we ate nothing but gluten-free and sugar-free food, and it was very tasty and very gourmet and very glamorous. And I usually put on a lot of weight when I go on a cruise or anything, but in 3 weeks eating that food, I did not gain 1 ounce, and it was good food. Loved eating it. It was very tasty. So yeah,
you're proving my point, is that you can eat healthy. It can be tasty, and particularly when we talk about caregivers. I mean, caregivers. There's at least 50 million caregivers in this country, and they're unpaid, and they're very stressed. So part of the Power of 5 formula addresses the need for these caregivers to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. Because if they have a crisis, they have their health crisis, the party's over. The whole thing collapses down upon itself. And that's a terrible outcome. And one of the statistics I've heard is 30% of caregivers succumb before their care recipients do. That's right. So it becomes it's kind of like when, as a doctor, I kept myself in shape. I did strength training. I took care of myself because it was a physically demanding job. It was demanding even though I was sitting down. So it was doing this research for the Power of Five that I also said, there's some things here that I'm not doing as well for myself, and I can and will do better.
Yeah.
Eating is one of those five things. And I'll just reiterate the point that people with Alzheimer's, dementia, and maybe all dementias as well, do really bad with sugar. They crave sugar, but sugar has that toxic element on the patient with a neurodegenerative disease, and that's one of the things they should avoid. And kudos to you for having good food prepared for the people who come to your retreat, because it's so important. It's so important for them to eat it, but also learn that it can be tasty and they can apply it in their own lives.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. It's one of the hardest things I have found, trying to get a caregiver to take care of themselves. They just are inclined to give until there's nothing left to give, and then they burn out. The old analogy of put your oxygen mask on first. But, I haven't given up on them, even though some of them are very stubborn.
Well, I can only say you can plug away and make some recommendations. And of the five, if people can pick two or three of them and start making some headway in terms of the other elements that I'll get into in a minute, it gets worth it. I mean, I can't imagine anybody's going to leave your week retreat with nothing. That they do something.
But we got to get them there first.
Yeah. The second element is stress. Avoid stress.
Yep.
And so for younger people who are on a job, they might have to leave their job if the job is really stressful, or have a discussion with their superiors and make the job better. But if you can't do those things, the addition of being mindful or learn meditation techniques that are being found more and more mainstream in Eastern medicine and Western medicine and lifestyle medicine. Your guest that you had last week, Karen, was all about lifestyle medicine and taking a lifestyle approach. And it's similar to the philosophy that I have, is that you work on your lifestyle, work within your realm at least.
Yeah.
So the third thing, and these are things you can do, incorporate, is sweat, which is exercise. And there's a wide variety of exercises. And hopefully on your retreats, people get an opportunity to see all kinds of different things that people can do. There's walking, and there's jogging, and there's
swimming, there's a tennis court, there's riding your bike, a lot of things to do.
Strength training is another, because you want to have better muscle mass, because muscle mass will help reduce risk of falls, which is another thing that can cause a downward spiral. Doing things that incorporate your brain. So compound exercises like doing a squat and then standing up and doing a bicep curl and then pushing your hands over your head and counting and doing 6 of those and then 6 of something else and rotating around. Keeps your brain engaged also, and it's an important component. I've also done spinning classes, I've done Pilates, I've done Tai Chi. All of these things are worthwhile to at least taste and sample to see what will fit into your lifestyle.
Yeah. What about that person saying, "Oh no, it's too late for me"? Is it ever too late?
It's never too early, and it's never too late. And I say it in every one of my presentations, so thanks for asking. And also, it's basically true. And research has shown that even if you start exercising after the age of 60, you will tack on more years of life than if you didn't.
Yeah.
So it's never too late. I wish I could get my kids who are in their mid to late 30s to take my experiences to heart. They do some of those things, but they don't embrace all of those things that I do. And it's like, well, those are your kids. What can you do?
Yeah, and it's not just their lives that they're, jeopardizing. It's when something happens to their parents, now all of a sudden they have to become a caregiver, and that can put a crimp in their lifestyle, can it? You're
absolutely right. And you've seen that. So, if you're not, if 30 or 40-year-olds not taking care of themselves, and then they can't take care of a parent when the parent is in need. And then you got to really scramble around to find that source of caregiving. I'm sure it's a subject that's come up for you.
And they should also encourage their parents, because maybe their parents, are not as educated as the boomers and the millennials on health, because, still eating sugar, they're still overweight, they still got that beer belly. And so maybe the adult children of those parents can maybe take them to a gym and say, hey, let's join a gym together. Hey, let's do this. Hey, let's do that. Knowing that if they don't motivate their parents to change their ways, then they're going to be a burden on them one day.
You're absolutely right. And it's a sad commentary on society. We may get into it a little too deeper, but I think people don't have enough skin in the game, and don't see what you just talked about. It's like, it's a really, in a positive way, it's a really selfish thing. If a child says to their parents, take better care of yourself, because I don't want to get stuck with it, in 6 years.
Yeah, well, that's the caregiver scenario, role reversal. The parent becomes the child, and the child becomes the parent. And that's a sad, sad commentary.
So we got sleep. People don't get enough sleep. 7 to 8 hours of sleep every night. If you have sleep apnea, get it fixed. Because
the average caregiver only gets 2 or 3 hours. I don't know how that happens. I can't survive on that.
Yeah, well, figure out how to get little pieces in there. And then the last thing is the letter S for sex. Well, sex is also about socialization and community and companionship. And one of the things that from your loneliness, from your work, is that the opposite of intimacy is isolation and loneliness.
Right.
That's a health hazard. So when people are caregivers and all they're doing is caregiving, and it's a lonely job. And, at 2:00 in the morning when they're up and something's going wrong, they look around and go, I'm only here by myself. So people will benefit from knowing how to ask for help, knowing how to put together a plan so that they're not overburdened with all of this. Also,
and if they don't have someone to have sex with, there's nothing wrong with doing it yourself, right? As long as you go through
Dr. Ruth Westheimer and I talked about that. But that's true, and there are ways, even with some advanced illnesses, where people can cuddle and people can have their intimate moments. And in our generation, the one you and I grew up in, intimacy is really important, and talking about sex is really important. Maybe a little less so in a younger generation, but that's an important ingredient in terms of how my whole Power of 5 formula comes together. Because if you don't have that socialization and some levels of intimacy, it's hard to intertwine the other S's of sleep and sweat and eating right and so forth. So it's a tight-knit formula. Those are my 5 S's, and what I encourage people to do is incorporate them in their lives, even if it's one step at a time, or one S and then another. Get buddies and have a buddy system where you can work out with someone, or talk about how you're going to eat right. Study up on the internet and find out the best ways of preparing food, or the healthiest ways of preparing food. Life expectancies have gone down in the last few years. Some of it's because of COVID, some of it's because of the opioid pandemic or epidemic, but the other is people aren't taking as good care of themselves. They don't walk as much. The portion sizes in restaurants have gone up, and obesity rates have climbed. 50% of Europe is technically obese. And in the United States, it's not a 50%, but I'm told in the next 10 years it will be. So we need to reverse in this country some of the things that are going on. And it goes back to the fact that, you're involved in caregiving. And if you're not healthy, you can't be a caregiver.
Right.
Or you become the care recipient.
Yeah, and diabetes is out of control as well. So, Doctor, how can our listeners reach you, find out how to get your book or whatever it is they want to ask you?
Well, thanks for asking. My website is powerof5life.com. They can reach me at david@powerof5life.com. And on my website, we have some free recipe books for the holidays that people can register and enjoy.
Healthy food, I'm assuming.
Healthy food. My wife has put together some really tempting recipes that are great around holiday time. I've written a free book called Notes on Living Longer that's available when people visit my website. And in addition to my books, the Power of Five, and I've got some good news and some bad news, you're old. I do have a book about driving, and I do have a journal that's available. All of my books are available on Amazon. And I just recently released a Power of Five course, a 5+ hour course that in which I elaborate on the 5 things, giving lots of important ingredients about and instructions about what to do and the importance of each. So I did it as if I was talking to my patient or talking to a baby boomer. Here's why. Here's what you can do. Here's the stress. Here's what you can do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. You are a wealth of information, and we appreciate. Remember, all our live shows become recorded pod and video casts on your favorite platforms. And my newly #1 release book, Secrets from the Hammock: Uncommon Wisdom for Uncommon Times, is changing lives all over the world. Available wherever books are sold, and also on my free membership website, caregiverdave.com. And join my Caregiver Dave Facebook community of 34,000 caregivers, where you'll learn all about my new Acapulco Villa Caregiver Wellness Vacation that I'm offering to burned out caregivers to keep as many of those 30% of them who die before their loved ones alive. And if you click the like or follow button on whatever platform you're watching or listening to this interview on, it helps us reach even more caregivers by improving Google's search engine algorithms. So thank you again to all my listeners out there all over the world for tuning in every Wednesday and making us the #1 caregiver podcast on the internet. So until next time, next week, same time, same channel, may God richly bless you. Bye-bye. Hey, everybody, it's Caregiver Dave here, caregiverdave.com in beautiful Acapulco. Been here with Charlene for 3 wonderful weeks, learning how to care for caregivers, putting on my own event to have caregivers come here in this beautiful Acapulco villa to rest, to relax, to recharge their batteries, to get some training from me, Caregiver Dave. And there's no substitute for getting away from your loved one's duties and responsibilities. Thank you.
Over there?
Okay, over there.
Over there. See,
Thank
come on.
you. The food is amazing. The staff are at your beck and call. The rooms are wonderful. The pool is great. The view is great. I mean, what's not to love? And
Yeah.
thank you.
See the view?
See the view. No, just carbonated water. Thank you. I mean, this is every caregiver's dream, to get away for a week. 7 wonderful, glorious days, and to be with other caregivers and to share their stories, to share their burdens, to share what they've learned, to network with each other. It's almost like a therapy group. And I have been wanting to do something tangible for caregivers, but it costs money. But I've managed to find a beautiful villa down here, owned by my mentor. And he's making it possible for me to bring 12, 14 caregivers up here for $3,995. Now, I know that's a lot of money, and a lot of people say, I don't have that money. But you know what? You might have siblings, you might have parents, you might have children who do have that money. And they might feel very guilty that they can't help you because you have the burden of caring for this loved one. you were the chosen one for whatever reason, because you have the compassion and the empathy and they don't, or you're geographically close to them and they're not. What a gift. I call it the gift of life, because 30% of caregivers die before their loved ones do. And so these loved ones of the caregiver, not the ones they're caring for, but the relatives, the siblings, the parents, the friends, the people with money, people who are doing very well, the attorneys, the doctors. There are caregivers everywhere. It crosses all geographic boundaries. It crosses all economic boundaries. It crosses all racial boundaries. It crosses all celebrity boundaries. And we want those people to send you on a vacation and to care for your loved one, or pay for the ones to care for the loved one, and obviously pay for your vacation. So I'm offering this, and the next one is going to be in May. And believe me, it's the gift of life. Just imagine what it's like being in paradise for 7 days, waking up at noon to a beautiful breakfast, a beautiful lunch, beautiful dinner. This is gourmet food. I've never tasted food like this in 5-star restaurants. They have a live-in chef, and I can't say enough for the service, for the food, for the quality, for the 6-star service. And this is what every caregiver needs. And don't let money stop you from doing this, because you might not have the money, but you know somebody who does, somebody who should be participating in the care of your loved one, but for whatever reason they can't. And they can participate financially to save your life, because let's face it, if you die or become hospitalized and need a caregiver of your own, then those people are going to be forced to either care for that loved one, or God forbid, put them in a nursing home, and 9 out of 10 of them I wouldn't put my cat in. So if you are in a position to do this for your loved one, contact me, caregiverdave.com. God bless you, and think about it.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Keep breathing, take it in and let it out. Keep breathing, it's gonna be okay. Believe in a